go ahead and get started. So, welcome. I'm Chad Ruoff. I practice sleep medicine, geriatric medicine in Southern California, Kaiser William Hills. Come see me if you have Kaiser. If you don't have Kaiser, you can't see me. I also, everything I learned in sleep medicine, really, I credit Stanford, I credit my mom, and my stepdad taught Swift. So, let's get started. So, believe in messages, and really the message I can give this talk in about 3 minutes. That's not really socially acceptable, so that would be weird. It's almost like the guy at the lunch session saying what the total tally of membership is. He got up and said, what, 780, and then walked away. That's a good talk. Very effective, right? So what we're going to talk about is basically, I'm going to try to convince you, and I'm still in the process of convincing myself, that there's a lot of comorbid diseases. Comorbid means you have one condition, and associated with that condition are other conditions. And so that there's a lot of comorbid diseases associated with narcolepsy, both before diagnosis and after diagnosis. And all your docs, I would say pretty much, even the sleep docs, aren't even aware of this. And so when you go to your doctor and you say you have narcolepsy, and they look at you like, okay, you need a refill? Okay, here's your med, goodbye. You should educate them and think, I'm feeling this way not because I have narcolepsy. Maybe it's because that crazy guy talked about all these comorbid conditions that are associated with narcolepsy. Maybe I have something else. When you start thinking about it, you've heard Dr. Mignot and Dr. Swig and a whole bunch of other docs today, and people say how the diagnostic dilemmas of narcolepsy. When I present this data to you, you're going to be like, oh my goodness, now I have all these conditions that can be with this, that might be explaining why I'm also tired, or maybe it is explaining, it's the only reason I'm tired. So it's confusing. So bear with me, but the message is a lot of diseases are associated with narcolepsy. And so when you go to your primary care doc, make sure to say, hey, I have narcolepsy, and there's some other things that could be associated with it, high blood pressure, cholesterol. Can you check my blood? Just don't give me the med refill, check my blood. Just make sure I'm doing okay. All right. So medical comorbidities, what does that mean? I'm going to define it again. AKA medical conditions such as high cholesterol associated with narcolepsy. That's what we're going to be talking about in the next 10 slides or so, okay? So we always have to start off with a little historical context. So Daniels in 1934 was really the first to report that 50% of patients gain weight around the time of onset of narcolepsy. So there's one thing that potentially explains why there's so many comorbid illnesses associated with narcolepsy. Narcoleptics tend to be a little overweight. Maybe that is why they have increased reflux or high blood pressure or cholesterol. Obesity has been reported in up to 42% and 60% of adults and children with narcolepsy, respectively. And just like Dr. Mignot said today, when one person finds something or reports something, doesn't mean it's not great news. But when a lot of people report something, that's real. That's fact. And so this has been replicated by different countries, different researchers. So it is true that if narcolepsy, most of the state is narcolepsy, cataplexy, they tend to be more overweight than non-narcoleptics. Why is that? I think 2 years ago I did a talk really just focused on just obesity. Right down here on the left-hand corner, the hyperacute neuron, it has a leptin receptor. 10 years ago, leptin was all ghrelin and leptin. That was the fad, the news, the hot news. So maybe that's why narcoleptics are a little bit more overweight than non-narcoleptics. It's something through the leptin, ghrelin, hormonal. Maybe it's inactivity. Maybe it's just eating too much. Maybe it's there's a couple papers supporting fat lipolysis and that's just a fancy word that makes me sound really smart for improper breakdown or the breakdown of fat in narcoleptics is not right. It's not working properly. Maybe it's medications, right? Maybe it's just the narcoleptic medications. Antidepressants can cause weight gain. Maybe it's that, but that doesn't really pan out. Maybe it's just antidepressants. And then, question mark, what is the real reason that's driving this obesity or overweight thing? One topic is eating problems. It's been riddled in the literature that narcoleptics oftentimes will have some eating problems. And so this is just one study that we're going to go over. Oh, you have to know a little bit of statistics for this lecture today. Odds ratio. Odds ratio. If I have an odds ratio of 2, that means I'm twice as likely to have something, all right? Everyone repeat that in their mind. An odds ratio of 2 means I'm twice as likely, if I have narcolepsy, I'm twice as likely to have condition X than a non-narcoleptic. If you don't know that, you're going to get glazed over really quick in this time. Okay? And I'm talking a little bit about studies here. So this is a case control study, right? I get a narcoleptic, and I find their similar age in a non-narcoleptic. And I study them, ask them questions, and see. So over here you can see, and it's important when you look at these, when you read papers and stuff, see the age group, see how many women, how many men are in the study. Does it really apply? Does it generalize to me, which is important? Not me, you. Look at the age of this population with eating problems. Around 40 years of age. Look at their BMI. Everyone in this room should know what their BMI is. Just as a reference point, a BMI of 25 to 30 is overweight. A BMI above 30 is considered obese, et cetera, et cetera. So this is an eating problem paper. So, and at the top of the line, if you do nothing else, don't stare at my slides, actually read the top. And you get the message, and then you just stare at me and blah, blah, blah. Just read the top and then just start daydreaming, okay? So the majority of patients with narcolepsy experience a number of symptoms of eating disorder, an irresistible craving for food, and binge eating as the most prominent feature. And so over here, you can see the narcoleptics, and I highlighted some of the more important things that they found a difference in between the narcoleptics and the non-narcoleptics. And just look, dread of becoming fat, irresistible and persistent craving for food, actions to lose weight through self-restriction, and just, have a little self-reflection moment and see if this applies to you. No need to raise your hand or anything. But so one thing important about this test, this study in 2008 is it didn't look at the timing of these cravings. And while you're doing that self-reflection, if this does apply to you, think about when you do get those cravings and see if I can predict when you do get those cravings with this study here. So this study came out a couple years after that study. They're like, well, are these cravings, are they happening in the morning, in the afternoon, or at night, in the evening? And sure enough, SRED is a fancy word or acronym for sleep-related eating disorder. It's eating at night. So what they found is that narcoleptic patients with sleep-related eating disorder were more frequently women, and they would happen much more often in the narcolepsy cataplexy group than the controls, very significant. And I see this from time to time, and it's often a neglected part of managing narcoleptics, but there's this craving in the evening for food. Sometimes patients will blame it on the Xyrem or what medication they're taking, that they just have to eat something, whether it's a cracker or something. They have to nibble on something. Yeah, she was just take the Xyrem on an empty stomach, but sometimes it's irresistible, I've had patients say. Maybe that's the med, or maybe this study suggests that it's just the disease per se going on. And does this help to explain a lot of reports showing that there's increased obesity, overweight in the narcoleptics? Here's another study, and this is getting to the core of my talk today, and I'm going to try to convince you. Back in 2013, this is a case control study. A whole bunch of sleep docs. This gentleman, Ohio, went around and collected a whole bunch of patients. I think some were from Todd Swig in the room, and he compared them to some controls. And this is what we found, what he found, rather. Oh my goodness. So if you have narcoleptic matched to their control, high cholesterol, narcoleptics had about an odds ratio, remember. If you don't know odds ratio, you're not going to understand this. You're 1.5 more times at risk of having high cholesterol than a non-narcoleptic. And just go down the list. Definitely the overweight obesity thing's been around since 1934. But this was kind of like, whoa, I don't really feel like I see this in the clinic, in the sleep clinic, when I see narcoleptics a lot. But this is a case control study, and it was like, okay, wait till we can replicate it in a different scenario by a different country and by a different researcher. And you can just read those yourself. Upper respiratory tract disease, 2.52 increased odds ratio, and most of those were allergies, asthma. So moving on to a different country just a few miles away. This is a Danish, socialized medicine at its finest. Everyone's registered. It's had beautiful, research in this country. And basically, this is the distribution of the people in this study. And there's about 800 or so narcoleptics matched to their controls, right? So you can compare narcoleptics versus controls. And this is what they found. And interesting in this study, because everyone basically is registered, so you can see what was that patient doing before the disease, what was that patient doing after the disease. And what do you think would be awesome for narcolepsy medications and diagnosis of narcolepsy. He would show that 3 years before the disease, the patient's running around searching, trying to find answers. Aha, eureka. I found my answer, I have narcolepsy, I'm going to treat this, everything's going to be hunky-dory, everything's going to go away, voila. Well, this study actually, blue, when I highlight something in blue, that means, because I know you can't read it back there, and that's aggravating, I'm sorry. But that means it was significant. And all these, let me just read through some of these. So infection and parasitic diseases, neoplasms, cancers, blood problems, endocrine problems, mental and psychiatric disorders, central nervous system problems, ENT, ear, nose, and throat problems, musculoskeletal problems, etc. All these were kind of significant. 3 years, meaning that more narcoleptics had it in their control, and there's the odds ratio, if you want to look at that. 3 years before and 3 years after. Shoot, shucks. And you would assume that they got on good treatment, right, and that their symptoms got better. And just so the more tangible diagnoses, so diabetes, 2.4 times more at risk in this study. Now, if you believe this data, and you have narcolepsy, and you haven't had your blood checked to see if you have diabetes, high glucose, that's a problem, I think, because it's a simple test. And we do it routinely in medicine. So get your A1C checked. I think there's good enough evidence to support that, especially given how frequently we check glucose and stuff like that. Obesity, 13 times more at risk. Sleep apnea, about 20 times more at risk. COPD, 3 times at risk. Low back pain, etc. So you get the point. I'm going to drill this into your head. You won't forget this. All right, so now, this is in the US. So now we went from that case control study, just cherry picking. Here's a narcoleptic, I'll find someone to compare it to. Now we just look at a health claims database across 5 years and see what we can find in the US and see if we can replicate what the Danes replicated, what they found. Here's the number of patients. So look how many controls, right? Non-narcoleptics we have in this versus narcoleptics. There's the ages, you can look at that. And let's see. So what I did here, just trying to trick you and keep you on your toes. This one, which is interesting and worthy of a topic, I think Dr. Swick's talking about it here in a bit, is pregnancy and narcolepsy, but every one of these items was statistically significant, meaning that the narcoleptics exhibited the condition more than the non-narcoleptics. And here are the odds ratios, except for complications during pregnancy, childbirth, and around the perinatal, around just giving birth. Those were no different than the non-narcoleptics, which is interesting. I don't have an answer why, but nevertheless interesting. And so every condition we looked at, every major classification, had more risk. Like, what the heck? I didn't believe it when I first saw it. I was part of this research. Still, I'm skeptical. Now, in the same publication, we looked, okay, well, now we have an opportunity. This is claims. So you're looking at what the doctor clicks. Does he click, he or she click narcolepsy with cataplexy or narcolepsy without cataplexy? Doctor's busy, they don't really pay attention. They just click something and make sure the medicine goes through, right? But check this out. Black are the people without narcolepsy. Here's all those different categories, right? Here are all the different categories. I don't expect you, there's not going to be any tests. Just know there's a lot of different diseases there. Every disease known to man is represented in each one, fits in each one of these bins. And you see the black line in infectious disease. There's a control. Look at narcolepsy. Blue is narcolepsy with cataplexy. Pink is narcolepsy without cataplexy. And there's the number of patients in each bin. What do you see? Both with or without, higher than control. With or without, higher than control. Yada, yada, yada. Ooh, what's going on here? You remember? That's the pregnancy stuff. Interesting. But everything's higher, pretty much. And the difference between narcolepsy with and without, clinically insignificant. It's still at risk. You get? Yeah. All right. So let's look at some just real, well-defined diagnoses that have been reported in the literature that are at increased risk are more commonly seen in the setting of narcolepsy. So we just kind of cherry-picked all these different conditions and said, okay, what's it look like? And here are the odds ratios. So what are some of the higher ones? So you go over PLMD, right? That's kicking your legs while you're asleep. Much higher in the narcoleptics versus non-narcoleptics. Sleep apnea, of course. PLMD and sleep apnea, there's a clear bias, right? Let's be fully If you were diagnosed with narcolepsy, that means you should have had a sleep test, right? So a lot of these controls probably didn't have a sleep test, right? But a lot of narcolepsy, so you're biasing. So that could explain why this is higher. But some of these other conditions, no, I don't know what the bias would be. Restless leg. Someone in here probably definitely has restless legs because in the general population, 5–10% of people have it. Certainly someone in here has it. But 9 times higher. REM behavior disorder, yelling, kicking, screaming, acting out your dreams, way more common, right? In narcoleptics. So this is an important point. So you have a condition which you can't get any doctor to diagnose you with. You're running around, pulling your hair out, saying, what the heck do I have, right? That's care-seeking behavior, right? Maybe that explains all this, right? You got someone that's frantic, I'm tired, you're not listening to me, I'm going to my next doctor, thank you so much. And along the way, I'm going to pick up this diagnosis, thank you, thank you, thank you. And so we looked at some very well-defined things, like heart attack. You can't pick that up just by doctor shop, typically. Stroke, probably can't pick that up. These are very hard laboratory test confirmed things. Look at the odds ratios. All of them are significant just about, but they're increased. Tracheotomy, you definitely can't fake that. You can't seek that out. If you do, you got problems. But 3-fold increased risk of being trached in our narcoleptics versus non-narcoleptics versus non-narcoleptics. So really, again, we were all skeptical looking at it, or I was definitely, with this data. And so that really just shows that there's a lot of associated comorbid conditions with this. Some neat questions you might have already thought of. Well, I'm a woman. It must be happening to the men, not me, right? No, pretty similar in this study. Cataplexy status. Remember we looked at that one that showed, is there a difference between with cataplexy and without? Maybe you can say, oh, he's cataplexy, he's going to get all the problems. Oh, I'm good, I don't have cataplexy. They don't know why I have what I have. He's the one that's going to get real sick. Well, so pretty much across the board, we're very similar, except for there's a slightly higher prevalence of respiratory problems in the narcolepsy cataplexy group. Don't know why. Use your wild imagination to figure that out. There was a slightly higher prevalence of diabetes and sleep apnea among patients in the narcolepsy without cataplexy. Makes some sense, a little bit, but still don't know why. The main message is gender really doesn't make a difference. Cataplexy status really doesn't make a difference. So then the Danes came back. That one was. So the Danes published something in 2013, and they came back to the drawing board probably around the same time this was happening. But their data looked. They refreshed their data. They had about 800 narcoleptics back in 2013. Now they upped their numbers to around 1,200 or so, and they divided it by age, right? So maybe the older narcoleptics, I'm young, I got no problems. It's the older narcoleptic that has problems, might be the rationale, or that might be what's going on. So let's look at this. Also, look at the married versus single. There's a lot, demographic data is always very interesting, right? You want to know what are the chances of a narcoleptic person getting married in this room? If you move to Denmark? About 50-50. So let's look at this. So this is kind of like 3 years before diagnosis versus 3 years after, right? Do the medical illnesses increase? Now, if you remember blue I highlighted for significant. This is the Danish in 2013 publication, just 3 years before, 3 years after. Everything I highlighted blue is statistically significant. And then they come out with this. I didn't even cross anything off or highlight anything because you know why? Everything just about is statistically significant. And on their first round, the pregnancy, they actually found a little bit of statistical difference in the pregnancy, but the point is, everything was there, regardless of age, right? And you can check out some of the odds ratios. Central nervous system problems, 37-fold increased risk. A lot of things going on. And it was there in the 20 to 60-year-olds and the 60-year plus. The narcolepsy patient had lower reproductive rates. Is that because they're not getting pregnant as much, or is that because they're not seeing the pregnancy to the end for a variety of reasons? Who knows? I don't know. Those are just theories that we try to come up with to explain the perinatal, the pregnancy thing. All right. So we know, been replicated a lot in a lot of different fashions, manners in different countries and stuff, that obesity is a drive, that more overweight in narcoleptics. Maybe that's explaining all these health conditions, right? Obesity causes a number of health conditions. That might be it. Well, there's a heart rate and blood pressure finding, and it's a little bit controversial, mixed results in the literature, but here's a summary that probably captures it the best, but there is some data for and against it. So narcoleptics, the heart rate in patients in animal models with narcolepsy, cataplexy is variable during wakefulness and normal to high during sleep. Responses of heart rate to internal stimuli, such as you're sleeping and I applaud you, if you're narcoleptic, your heart rate response is not going to be as profound as a non-narcoleptic when I poke and prod them during their sleep. And there's a lot of literature on dipping and non-dipping with blood pressure. So narcolepsy patients in animal models, they don't, in the studies, they don't drop their blood pressure by 10% or more when they're sleeping. Could that explain it? And so there's actually data to say that if I check your blood pressure in the office and it's normal, but then I check your blood pressure, so if I check your blood pressure in the office and it's normal, I never give you a medicine, right? No. But if I then said, I'm a really astute clinician and I'm going to geek out with you and I'm going to really do a good study on you, I check your 24-hour blood pressure and it doesn't drop by 10% or more at night, I should be bringing you in and talking to you about blood pressure medications. So my point is that an office-based blood pressure measure, 24-hour blood pressure is really the So maybe that explains why increase all these other cardiovascular problems, high blood pressure, you name it, tracheostomy, all these things, potential things. Is maybe it's a blood pressure thing. Maybe it's the overweight obesity that's leading to this. I don't know. But these are all just plausible explanations to explain the data. Getting to the real root of the matter. So if I have narcolepsy, I have a lot more comorbid conditions. What's my lifespan look like, right? This was, I think, first touched on in like 2013 by O'Hyan, and I don't think he barely reached statistical significance in showing that there was an increased risk, or maybe there was a slight, very slight. So what this is a survival curve. So this blue line are the controls, non-narcoleptics. And this is from when you first start watching them to see if they're dying or living. And then here are narcolepsy, cataplexy. And you can see as each year goes on, what's happening. It's splitting, there's some separation, and more narcolepsy, cataplexy, maybe you're dying. And it's than non-narcoleptics. And this is not profound. This is not go meet with a financial advisor and start your financial planning and what's it called, estate planning and stuff like that. Nothing like that. But this is where you got to start thinking about. Some of these were 1.38. I mean, don't cross the road three less times per week, and you would probably, this would be no. You wouldn't have to worry about this, right? 1.38 is not that much of an increased risk. But it's there, and this is what you have to start thinking about. This is in a different, it's the same refresh. And so he, out of Denmark, did show that there is an increased risk, maybe increased mortality. Very small. I do not want you to walk out of it. That is not the point of this talk. I'm going to die. The point is, there's a lot of comorbid conditions, and don't just go through your life blaming everything on the narcolepsy. Oh, I have narcolepsy. Because your doctors are just going to say, oh, you got narcolepsy. See you here. Here's your refill. Ask, challenge them. All right. So, what I just said is right up here now. The potential presence of narcolepsy and other sleep disorders should be investigated in patients who present with other conditions and have sleep or sleepiness-related complaints. I kind of agree with that one. I wasn't the real proponent of putting that in this publication, but I do agree with this one. Physicians should evaluate for comorbid medical conditions among patients with narcolepsy. That, I think, based on this. So when you go get that annual physical, don't just, hey, I'm going to play sports, can I get a physical? Okay. Hey, can you check my blood? Hey, can you do a review systems and see if I have anything else going on? All right, so let's talk about psychiatric comorbidities. This is complicated. So, let's focus our attention here. Just walk down memory lane. You always got to start to talk off Parson talks with some history. So 1908, 1938, 1958, those are dates. But they're talking about potential schizophrenia, psychiatric conditions overlapping with narcolepsy, dating back to the early 1900s. Something's there. Now, I'm going to jump. Well, that's really the point of this whole slide. Yeah, that's the point of that whole slide. But now you need to keep in mind, what are the 5, and we beat every year, I mean, you hear this, if you're new, this is the first year, but if you come back, you'll hear it again. Excessive daytime, the pentat, the narcolepsy pentat, right? Excessive daytime sleepiness, cataplexy, hallucinations, paralysis, disrupted nighttime sleep. Where do you think this psychosis, schizophrenia, where do you think the doctors could potentially be saying, no, you have schizophrenia, you don't have narcolepsy? With these hallucinations, right? So the hallucinations in narcolepsy, are they more auditory or are they more visual? What do you think? Yes, and then in schizophrenia, what are they typically? More auditory, right? So these are the nuances that sleep psychiatrists need to know, and also the real important one. When do hallucinations in narcolepsy occur? Sleep transitions, right? I mean, if you're driving down the road and I have seen a patient like this, they reported this, but typically you're driving down the road and you see a bat fly through the window and you're not sleeping. That's probably not narcolepsy, right? But that's probably what explains this literature dating back to the 1900s of hallucinations, schizophrenia, and stuff. And then here's how it kind of pans out with the different conditions of the pentat. This is going back to now we talked about medical problems, comorbid conditions. Now we're going to talk about psychiatric conditions, using some of the same data, same studies. So right here, so you guys are not experts at statistics. So here are your odds ratios. So let's pick bipolar. In this 300 or so narcoleptics, they were about 4.5 times more likely to have bipolar than non-narcoleptics. And you can go through the list. The 2 conditions that weren't there, for some reason, alcohol dependence wasn't really reported in the narcoleptics. Why might that be? Well, if you get a patient they're drinking a lot of alcohol, I'm not going to diagnose you with narcolepsy. I'm going to diagnose you with alcohol problems, right? Go into that. It's kind of a diagnostic issue, potentially. But that's that. That's the point there. Let's look at the dates. So 3 years before, 3 years after. I didn't do my clever little highlight of blue here, but the main thing was, this is the 2013, yeah. They did not find a statistically significant difference with if you have narcolepsy versus non-narcolepsy. You're not at increased risk of psychiatric mental disorders. So move to Denmark, 50% chance of getting married, and you're less likely to have a mental disorder than narcolepsy. That's in 2013. If you move there between 13 and 17, you're bitter. Because he ended up coming out with a study that showed that there was an increased risk of mental and psychiatric conditions. Now let's look back at that US-based, right, health claims database in the United States for psychiatric conditions. And so what you end up seeing here are all the odds ratios. These are all statistically significant, findings. So ADHD, no-brainer, right? 6-fold increased risk. Is that a true diagnosis, or is that just misdiagnosis, or we don't know what we're doing? It's a difficult group to deal with. But nonetheless, increased odds ratios across the board in all different categories. One of the ones to note right here is suicide. So it was about a 4-fold increased risk, but you're dealing with very small numbers. But nevertheless, that's there. And then alcohol-related diseases, not too much increased risk there. So across the board. So that's kind of the same storyline. So we got to spice it up a little bit. So let's ask some questions, right? So what about if I'm a man and she's a woman? Are we at different risk? Same, right? Whether you're man or woman with narcolepsy, you have increased risk of psychiatric illnesses, according to this health plan. What about age? So we got a storyline. That's good. So there's increased prevalence of anxiety and mood disorders in the younger age groups. And if the older folks in here reflect back, that makes sense. So you can see in these age bands, so in the 18 to 24 age group for anxiety disorders, 32% of the narcoleptics met criteria versus 13% of the non-narcoleptics. And as the age bands increase, you see a decline. Mood disorders, same thing, black is narcolepsy, that's non-narcoleptic. Increased risk of mood disorder, depression, something So that's that. So increased medical comorbidities, increased psychiatric comorbidities. Let's look at a general population study, completely changing gears, because I've utterly convinced you that there's increased comorbidities with medical and psychiatric and narcoleptic, so we're done with that chapter. Let's move on to this general population. If we just query a whole bunch of the people from the general population, what is the top predictor for daytime sleepiness in the general population? Oh, interesting. So what is it? And this is in descending order. Depression. In this finding, so if you're sleepy in the general population, and if I build a survey and ask a whole bunch of patients, why are you sleepy, and what condition, or are you sleepy, yes, no, and look at what kind of medical conditions they have and what's going on in their life, depression seems like one of the strongest predictors. Meaning, if you're depressed, you got a higher chance of getting sleep. That's complicated, right? Because in narcoleptics, there's a lot of overlap there. Stronger in the younger and independent of antidepressant medication. What's the next predictor? BMI. Oh my gosh, I already told you narcoleptics are overweight. Now I'm telling you general population weight is the second most likely predictor of being sleepy. Oh, and you can see that, as your weight goes up, what happens with this. What's the next one you think? I guess think, predict. Push through that snooze. Age. Aha. Now, for the young folks in here, you're in luck. This is some good data for you. The older folks, Age. So 20 to 30-year-olds, increased risk in the general population to be sleepy, right? And it gets better with age. But once you hit 75, you get sleepy in the general population. Subjective estimate of typical sleep duration. So if you report low sleep in the general population, you're going to be sleepy. That's kind of a no-brainer. 2/3. Diabetes. Kind of ties into what we talked about earlier. Get it checked. So about 16% of diabetics were reporting either daytime sleepiness versus the non-diabetics around like 6% in this study. Smoking, that's odd. But that's interesting, right? Why do you think that is? Self-medication. And then, if they smoke, what's going to happen to their lungs? Increased risk of respiratory problem. Maybe. Sleep apnea. Now, I'm a sleep doc. Where do I want sleep apnea to fall in this descending order? I want it to be all the way at the freaking top. Where did it fall? At the bottom. Depression, BMI, age. When you went to see your sleep doctor and you said you were sleepy, did they say you have this, and this? Or did they say, I'm going to get sleep, so they look for sleep apnea? That's all there is, guys, sleep apnea. They said, let's get a sleep, so they look for sleep apnea. I'm guilty of it too. So, that's general population things, just to self-reflect upon. All right, so give a shout out to Dr. Mignot back in 2006, and to thoroughly confuse you more. As a patient, this summer here, take a whole bunch of patients from the community in Wisconsin, the glorious hills of Wisconsin. Maybe it's all because of the cheese, I don't know, but when you do MSLTs in those folks, about 6% of the men and about 1% of the women end up with a diagnosis of narcolepsy based on MSLT criteria. That's crazy. I do 100 MSLTs on men, not complaining about anything, just Joe Schmo going to his government job, whatever. Sure, you have narcolepsy. What? 6% versus 1%. That's confusing. So that was in 2006. So what do we do with that? So then you have to start making sure that you're doing the MSLT in the right situation and following the standards closely and everything like that. And then what are some of the predictors? Just to confuse matters more, one of the most significant predictors of a positive MSLT in these community general population folks that underwent the test was shift work. So if any of you had an MSLT when you're doing crazy shifts, I don't have much faith in that MSLT. Because look at the odds ratio. You guys are experts in stats. Shift work. When you're done. Shift work, increased odds of a positive MSLT, or more than 2 dream episodes, two storms, 30 times more likely if you're doing shift work and you do MSLT. So if you were working crazy hours and a regular sleep schedule and you have a positive MSLT, and done in the wrong context, I mean, that's not a positive MSLT. So we need better tests, right? That's the message there. And this is a confusing field where you really dive in. The more you understand, the less you understand. Sorry, folks. And then antidepressants, right? So if you have an MSLT, and I see this on monthly basis. You have an MSLT and you're on an antidepressant, how do you interpret that MSLT? I have no idea, because look, you're at 8-fold increased risk of knocking out 2 dream episodes on those naps if you're on an antidepressant. Don't know how to interpret it, period. How long should you be off of it? Don't know, really. If you did go off of it for 2 weeks, I'd say do 4 weeks. If you're off of it for 4 weeks, I'd say 6 weeks. At least a month, I would say. All right, and then what about, Dr. Miguel alluded to this publication. So is this a stable finding? So if you repeat it, if you do an MSLT, it's positive. What's the likelihood of being positive again and again and again? Not great. What's the message? Well, we need more research funding and we need a better test, is the answer there. I've really been blocking revision this whole talk. So that's that. And then, that's too small, but we won't talk about that. So it's another study basically just showing that, yeah, it's not a really stable feature. It's more stable in narcolepsy, cataplexy, the MSLT. Of course, it's a very well-defined, hypercretin deficient kind of condition. But in narcolepsy without cataplexy, it's not as stable of a finding on the MSLT. And actually, you end up seeing a narcoleptic on one test turning into idiopathic hypersomnia on another test, and vice versa. So, to Dr. Mio's point this morning, I just want to echo, why are we differentiating sleepiness based on MSLT and saying, oh, you have idiopathic hypersomnia, you get no medications. Oh, if you have narcolepsy, you score it, you get all the medications, you get more options for medications. If it's not a stable feature, right? I mean, if you go to the hospital, they say you have a heart attack, and you go tomorrow and say, no, you didn't have a heart attack yesterday, I'm sorry, that would make you mad. Same thing here, right? We need a stable test. That's it. Questions?
Then you have a 50% chance of having an incorrect result, right? Not meaning that you're wrong with medication.
So first thing I would say is we need better tests. The second thing I would say, with the available tests that we have, you need to make sure that you're doing them to the T per the protocol. Right. Meaning you're getting adequate sleep, you're going to bed at a consistent time, you're waking up at a consistent time, you don't have delayed sleep phase, maybe you have actigraphy. We need to follow the protocol. And I don't think as a community, and this isn't just your fault, this is a sleep community, we've done a horrible job at doing this. You know why though? Because there's not a lot of reimbursement for doing actigraphy and that sort of stuff. So we can't get paid for it. While we all love to treat, if there's no money attached to that, there's no way we can justify buying actigraphy watches to put on patients to make sure they're getting adequate sleep. That will then lead to that discussion. Look, you're going to bed at 3. In a weekly, this is what I sometimes have a discussion with a patient on this note. This is way off topic, but be wary of asking me another question. Patients will say, oh, on the weekends I go to bed at, or on the weekdays I go to bed at 11, and then on the weekend, I go to bed at 11, wake up at 7. I get up to work. On the weekends, I sleep till 10 or 11, right? So what's the worst night they're going to have? It's Sunday night. What does that mean? It means you're 3 to 4 hours swing when you're waking up and when you're going to bed, potentially, or at least maybe just when you're waking up. That's freaking jet lag. I know that if someone in here that's from the East Coast, you're hurt, or vice versa. So if you're not having a stable sleep-wake schedule, you're going to feel like crap. And those are the things that we need to pull out of there. And maybe that's why the MSLT in this data, even though a lot of this data was done at, the ivory towers, the academic institutions, but those institutions weren't doing actigraphy and really honing in on this. They were really relying upon, blah, 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 blah. What was your question? Yeah. Good question. Ask the Narcolepsy Network folks. They have, yeah.
So I'm one of those lucky people who's had a trait and has like 5 comorbidities and all that. Is that massive research? It's me too.
Yeah. See, I gave this talk, but I still don't believe it.
You're the scar.
Why do narcoleptics get traits? Because
I'm not sure. I don't have a trait, but
So one thing is that we have a test that's probably not the best test, right? And so if you have a group of people that walk around picking up a lot of medical conditions, and you do this test that's not great, then you pick up a label with narcolepsy. That's the cynic, right? Oh, there's something in it, just, care seeking. But it doesn't seem like that.
Yeah, it's like things like tricks, or nobody gets a trick by mistake.
It doesn't seem like I'm not just a cynic. Yeah, it doesn't seem like that.
So
I don't know why.
I'm okay with sharing, so I'll be totally honest. Like I've had narcolepsy since I was 13, and the older I get, and like all the data that he presented is very accurate for what's happening in my life.
Yeah.
Now I'm in Canada, and one of the biggest problems is like trying to get my family doc to actually understand what the physical
Comorbidity.
so, what do you do when the family doc says, no, there's nothing wrong, your sleep doc backs you up for 2 years, this person needs this type of testing, and
Well, it depends on the test that you're asking for, but certainly getting an annual physical with some blood work, I think you can accomplish that. Getting much beyond that, yeah, that can be challenging.
yeah, it's,
yeah.
the sleep doc's on my side, everything's good there, but family doc just doesn't.
So then just have to sleep that work.
In our province, I don't use it, it has to be done on your dental practice. So I'm in a serious situation. Serious.
It needs to stay there.
Yeah.
I mean, you can fire.
Next question.
It's a related question.
Yes, ma'am.
You talked about the insurance reimbursement or other than fee, but how does it work with all these other potential comorbidities? Is even a sleep doctor going to find the insurance company saying, wait a minute, I'm not going down that road?
Well, a lot of these conditions, right, the message is that what I don't want, and what I see patients do is they walk through their life and, oh, I feel this, I have narcolepsy, I feel this, I have narcolepsy. And then if you take that information to the doctors are figuring out what kind of plan can I sell to myself. Oh, she has narcolepsy, she thinks she hurts here because of narcolepsy, but she always sleeps on her left. Okay, narcolepsy. Think outside the box and just say, it could be something else. That's the main message here. If you have a serious symptom, these tests are covered. And we're talking about medical conditions and stuff like that. If you think you might have a psychiatric condition, good luck getting in to see mental health, but once you get in there, they'll cover it if you have coverage. Yes?
Kind of related as well. I'm on Medicare, and that for some weird reason, diabetes test is not covered.
Yeah, it should be with the annual physical, absolutely. It's just a
They
standard.
refuse it twice. Like, would that data help convince you?
Probably not. No.
Is there not
No.
open up for diabetes?
I just say you're eating a lot more. Yes, I have. And then all, whether I should show that data. Yeah, I have that. Both those studies have that. Right, so you say, okay, well, maybe that's just the diagnosis, but these are health claims database, so we look at meds, and you do see that the narcoleptics were taking more antidepressants than the controls, above and beyond. Yeah. So I have that data is in these publications. Yeah, right there.
So, I was curious about the possible comorbidity of multiple autoimmune diseases. Because I've met quite a few people like myself who have narcolepsy but also have other autoimmune issues. Is that something that is common? Are there?
That did come up in this, and it was increased. I cannot remember the exact, but I mean, that's in the literature. That's reported in the literature, certainly. Yes, sir.
I was wondering about POTS, if you're familiar with the diagnosis.
Yes.
Yeah. Are there any work being underway to look at the comorbidity of POTS and narcolepsy?
So there is some stuff on, of course, POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome, POTS, autonomic instability with fatigue and things like that. There's a lot of literature there. I kind of allude to it a little bit with the autonomic instability, the non-dipping at night with the narcoleptics, the blunted heart rate response and stuff like that. I think there is a publication or two looking at autonomic evaluation in narcoleptics, like blood pressure and stuff. And Yeah, there is a recent publication. But there's a lot, I see a lot of patients in the sleep clinic that have POTS, and they're coming in for fatigue. So complicated subject matter, but that's there. I mean, I don't know if that somewhat answered your question, but I'll move on. You can find me later.
Yes, thank you for your talk. I'm curious about some of the implications. So a lot of the conditions that you mentioned, the top ones, are also related to someone who might be severely sleep deprived or who would, even though OSA didn't make the top of the list.
Oh, the general
You
population.
might expect that. So for something like sleep apnea, we treat the sleep, right, instead of being stuck in your first stage of sleep. You can go down, get deeper stages, or start a sleep architecture if you're not being interrupted at night.
Right.
Just like we're maybe being interrupted by our dreams. So similar to our sleep.
So phrase your question again. I think
My question is, are these findings indicative of general sleep deprivation?
all of these comorbid conditions.
Right, and instead of, let's say.
Certainly not getting a trade. So I don't think so. I don't think so. That's why, but it's a good explanation. It's a good theory, right?
The secondary question is on these follow-ups, are they able to evaluate something that would more treat your sleep architecture, like Xyrem, and see if improvements there versus patients who may have been on stimulants?
Question.
And see if there's a difference in the post follow-up?
Can you imagine though if that medication came out, how much that medication would cost?
Which one?
The one that you're talking about? That melts away all these comorbid conditions?
Well, no, I'm talking about.
Improves the sleep architecture, the diabetes melts away, the cardiovascular.
The question would be if I had the option of Xyrem or stimulants, right?
Which would you pick?
And
Whichever one makes you feel
does
better.
that have a on your comorbidity?
I mean, stimulants can increase heart rate. Xyrem has a high salt load. That gets to the blood pressure, heart rate kind of thing. But I would say whichever one makes you feel better.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So is, I think what you said is that the MSLT is not reliable for both like false positives and false negatives. Like, is it just both ways? It's not perfect.
Just make sure you're doing everything right before you get the MSLT done.
Right. So
Do it right.
okay.
And everyone in this room can know if you stay up till 4 a.m. one night and you did that a week before the MSLT, that's not doing it right.
Right. So like the study that with the Wisconsin population that had false positives, that was, you're saying like all the prep work maybe wasn't done totally
So that-
right because of the like shift workers.
Yeah, so
Like,
they
that's
did
what
it,
you're doing.
regardless of whether you're a shift worker or not, they did the test, right? So that's
Okay.
awesome. And so what they found, that if you do the test and you're a shift worker, I have to remember how that was exactly defined, but it's a one question item. Do you
Okay.
go to bed later than this because of work? Much
Right.
more positive tests.
Okay.
So keeping your regular sleep, yes, sir.
Please, no more funny quips about pain.
Yes, sir.
Narcolepsy is not exactly the best thing to happen.
That was just to get a blood sugar.
I'm kidding.
Yes.
Short behind those, when you're taking REM suppressing antidepressants, what did you study? They had an observation of two.
You're really watching the data, that's impressive. So it was actually non-REM suppressing antidepressants that had an uptick. The REM suppressing didn't. That makes sense though, because you're suppressing REM, so you're not going to see the drink episode.
Had an observation of two.
But the other one's like 8 or so. Yeah, so it's much higher.
But
That
it
makes
increased slightly even
Yeah,
with the.
yeah. I would say clinically, I don't even really pay too much attention whether it's either, are you on an antidepressant or are you not? For research, you can geek out and say REM suppressing or non-suppressing, but I'd say clinically, are you or are you not?
I got type 2 at 2 studies, and the second one I was on REM suppressing and I failed just by a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
So I know where it just went back.
But if you failed about a couple of seconds, that's a sleep latency issue, not the REM issue, so. Yeah, all the way in the back.
Hi, are you aware of any statistics on comorbidity between narcolepsy with cataplexy and Klein-Levin syndrome?
No.
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be a diagnostic dilemma, I think, for the client, yeah.
There are 3 cases in the world literature with narcolepsy type 1 narcolepsy type 2 and KLS. And Lynn Trotty has 2 of them, I have 1 of them.
But diagnostically, it's very challenging to understand how that would be, because Klein 11 is periodic, means it has to come on and it has to go completely away. Narcolepsy, it can never go away.
Yeah,
So
like
how do you
up
have-
into narcolepsy. Like
So
cataplexy
it's a
severe.
diagnostic conundrum, really. I don't know quite how, if you follow the rule book exactly, I don't think it can be. But
Like
you know,
cataplexy is severe.
that's clinical medicine versus following a diagnostic manual. Yes.
Since fatigue is often a symptom of a lot of these comorbid disorders, how do you sort that out from the EDS from narcolepsy, and how does that change treatment options or the way that you treat a patient? And I just noticed that once I started getting other autoimmune issues and just the crushing fatigue that comes with all of that, I felt like I was just in a time warp almost. And I couldn't treat it because I didn't even know what I was treating at that point.
Well said. Yeah, I agree. I think, so my take on fatigue, sleepiness, it's difficult even if I'm sitting in front of a patient to really tease out, is it fatigue or sleepiness? Yes, I say fatigue is this feeling of tired behind the eyes, exhausted, like you just can't go on. Sleepiness is true tendency to fall asleep. But in some instances I say this and the patient still listening like, I don't know. It's both, depends. But are you ever really sleepy? So the point is that these are all like questionnaires. And if you can't really, if you're having problems really distinguishing, we're together, we're certainly having problems. It's a challenging thing. That's why we do blood tests. Right? You do not have sleepiness, you have fatigue. According to this blood test. Right? That's very accurate and stable. Yes?
Do you have a suggestion of at what age we should see annual physicals to detect all these things?
At least 20 to 59, if you're in Denmark. And there's precocious puberty and children that develop narcolepsy. There's an increase of onset of weight gain during the onset of narcolepsy. They have some of the same hormone disabilities, so I would say it's